Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my wonderful and amazing people. I've been talking about this thing that is happening in Nigeria, that God is the one that is using you and me to expose the laws that regulates marriage, or the laws in marriage. A lot of people don't understand what their rights or their rights are in marriages. So I'm going to let you all listen to this lawyer. Let him explain the differences in the marriages we have in Nigeria and the laws that both the men and the women all have. So I'm going to let you all listen to him and just listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, DPA members and followers, welcome to yet another discussion live on DPA. I chose to have this talk this morning because I realized that there are so many things we need to explain to you about the way the marriage law works in Nigeria. I realized this from the several questions and messages I received from so many people. First, I was surprised, maybe not so surprised, that many people do not understand some basic elements or basic attributes of the marriage law in Nigeria. I have asked myself, what could be responsible for this lack of knowledge or lack of adequate information on how the marriage law works? I have tried to explain that, and I think it has to do with the fact that for many people, they understand marriage from very different angles. For instance, some understand marriage from the natural perspective of the attraction of the opposites, man and woman coming together, forming a union, and that biological necessity of man and woman living together. Some people understand it in that way, and they focus on what it will take them to be a good partner, to satisfy the needs of the other person, to keep the opposite party happy, that's the opposite sex happy, in a sustained manner in a relationship, in a marriage. Some understand marriage from the biblical account, from their religious understanding of man and woman. For Christians or those who believe in the Bible, they will look at, we have wind interrupting us because this is being done outdoors. Bear with us. This is being done outdoors, and the winds want to participate in this. So some people see it from the position of the Bible, and they try to explain marriage in the context of what God put together. They believe it is God driving their marriage, and that is the God force that determines their marriage, and they approach it from the biblical account. And yet, there is a third angle from which some of us must see marriages, and that is the angle of the law. What do you think created marriage? I'm sure many of you, if I ask you what created marriage, you will go to your religious beliefs. But the fact is that marriage is created by law. It is the law that establishes marriage. It is the law that determines who can marry whom, the conditions and circumstances under which you could marry. It is the law that determines what marriage is valid and what marriage is not valid. It is the law that determines the consequences of a valid marriage and the consequences of void marriages or voidable marriages. So many people are bound to misunderstand marriage. Highly intelligent people, highly mature people, you will think these are knowledgeable people, but they still don't understand what marriage is about. I realized this because a basic post I made yesterday, or maybe earlier this morning, in which I tried to explain that polygamy, even though allowed in Nigeria, is not an absolute thing. It's not an absolute permission for every husband to go and get a second wife. Indeed, Only certain men who qualify for a second wife can have a second wife. And this is done by the choice of marriage type you make at the beginning. The first time you get married, you have a decision to make. You have a choice. And the choice could be to marry under the customs or to marry under the statute, that is under the Marriage Act. There is a consequence, a fundamental consequence to that choice when you make it. Okay, I give you an example. Two brothers, brother A and brother B, they both want to marry. Brother A marries under the customs, did not marry under the act. He marries under the customs. And brother B marries under the act. Of course, both of them are married, both of them are living with their wives, and everything seems okay. But these two men stand in different positions before the law. Brother A, who married under the customs, may want to have a second wife. If he decides to do so, it is between him and his wife. The law allows him to do so because he married under the customs. However, brother B, who married under the act, cannot have a second wife. It's against the law for him to have a second wife. And if we interpret our law strictly, it's actually an offense for which he could go to jail. He can't have a second wife. That is what many people don't know. So brother B may look at his brother A and say, come on, my brother could have a second, third wife. Why can't I have a second wife? And he begins to quote his customs and his traditions. And he begins to quote his forefathers. Oh, our forefathers married so many people. I can now marry. They will even quote the Bible that Solomon married so many wives. All those things you do or quote are wrong. It is an offense. It is not allowed by law to have a second wife if your first marriage was done under the Marriage Act. So it's a choice. You got to make that choice, and once you make that choice, you stick to it. You cannot change course midway. Absolutely. Because people will say, hey, I chose to be monogamous, to have one wife before, but I now changed my mind. I want to have a second wife. It's not true. It's not true. You have to stick to whatever option you maintain at the beginning. It doesn't mean that when you marry under the act, you cannot divorce. You can divorce, you can dissolve that marriage and marry someone else. What the act says is that you can't marry both of them at the same time. You can't have two wives. The penalty for it is 2 years in prison. It's unfortunate that in Nigeria they don't enforce that law, but I can tell you one thing today. If a police commissioner decides to charge you to court for bigamy, you will go to prison. The judge will put you in prison because the law is very clear. The fact that they don't put people in prison for that now doesn't mean they cannot put you in prison. They may put you in prison, especially if you have been annoying the police. For instance, I am a Kugwe who've been criticizing the police in Nigeria. If I were to go and, if I were married under the act and I get a second wife, Nigerian police will prosecute me and put me in prison. Then you will know that the law exists. So, get that clear, okay? So now, women, having explained this to you, you know the implications. If you want to marry a man and he says he doesn't want to marry you under the act, he is indirectly telling you that he wants to reserve the right to have a second wife. You have to ask yourself, would you want your husband to have a second wife? If the answer is absolutely no, then tell him you're not going to marry him unless he marries you under the act. And this is why I tell our women, don't get pregnant until marriage ceremony is over. Because when you get pregnant, when your fiancé gets you pregnant, he may not have a registry marriage with you. Why would he? He already have you. He already has you. You're already there with pregnancy. So pregnancy before marriage weakens you and denies you the choice. So please, young girls, young women listening to me, if you meet a man who doesn't want to marry you under the act, it is a red flag. Refuse the marriage. Stop talking to him. Because you know what it means? He's going to get his second wife one day. He will have that right. Even if he doesn't get a second wife, the fact that your husband has the right to get a second wife is going to be a problem for you. If you argue with him, he will threaten you. If you do what he doesn't like, he will tell you he will get a second wife. And you know he's got the right to do so. You'll be weak. And by the way, if your husband has the right to get a second wife, that means he has the right to cheat on you. If you catch him with a girlfriend, he will tell you, well, I can marry her. So, not having your marriage under the act is a very dangerous way to live in modern days. You should understand it. Now, many of you have asked me so many questions about how does a church marriage figure in here compared to a marriage at the registry. Let me explain to you. The church marriage per se, there is really nothing like church marriage. Let's be honest. What the church does is to bless whatever marriage you want to have. If you have only traditional marriage and you go to church and you don't request for registry marriage, the church can give you their certificate and bless your marriage, but that's not marriage under the act. But there's a good thing. Most churches are licensed to celebrate a marriage under the act. I want you to pay close attention now. Most churches are licensed to celebrate marriage under the act. That is why if you look at your marriage certificate, at the bottom right corner of that certificate, you see where the official will sign. In that place the officials will sign, you see minister/registrar. Minister/registrar. Who is the minister? The minister meant there is your priest, your pastor. The registrar is the registrar at the marriage registry. So a licensed church can celebrate a marriage under the Marriage Act. But you gotta be careful that they're doing it. The fact that they gave the church license to do so does not mean that the church is going to do exactly that. For the church to celebrate a marriage under the act, the church must fill the appropriate forms. The appropriate forms must be filled and returned to the marriage registry, where they have registry of married people. Sometimes some churches don't want to go through the trouble of going to submit forms at the marriage registry. It is tedious for them. They don't want to do that. And even though there is a marriage registry in every local government has its own marriage registry, okay? And the church should go to the marriage registry in the local government where it is to submit the forms, so that the marriage registry is the custodian of the register of married people. So, if your church doesn't do that, or, you know the funny thing that has happened many times, and you gotta listen very carefully now. The church will give the form to the husband after the church has done all these things for you. They will give it to your husband and tell him to return it to the local government. And guess what? He will not return it to the local government. Oh, he may forget. He may be mischievous and destroys it. He may be mischievous and decide not to return it. So now, because he did not return it to the local government, to the registry has no record of your marriage. The registry will not issue you certificate or certified copy of your marriage certificate. So when you now get into trouble, you will find out that you did not have a marriage under the act. So you have to be thorough, you have to be meticulous. But my advice to people is this: instead of making this mistake of the church not remembering, or the church filling the wrong form, or not filling the right way, you go to the marriage registry and do it yourself. Of all the various marriages you can have in Nigeria, the cheapest is the marriage registry, and it is the most valid in law. Your traditional marriage is a whole lot of party and a whole lot of money, but when it comes to law, it doesn't stand a very strong ground. It's very expensive. Traditional marriage is expensive. Then you go to the church and have another big party, is extremely expensive. But you go to the marriage registry with less than 50,000, you will be married the same day. It's not complicated. And that is the best marriage. So it is an irony that the best form of marriage is the cheapest form of marriage. And yet people don't do that, because you're carried away by the parties and the showbiz and all those things, the demonstration. You want to prove to all the girls in town that you marry the richest man, the most handsome man, and you dance away your life in your traditional marriage. Fantastic, lovely. But you must know that if there is a problem in the marriage, your traditional marriage activities will not give you the rights you need. So always do all of them. If you can, I would tell you to do all of them. The traditional marriage is important because that is an opportunity for your family to meet your husband's family and get to know each other and get to know themselves and create some rapport. It is also evidence to announce to everybody that you are no longer a spinster, you're married. Two, it's also a wonderful party for you to call your friends and celebrate with them and have money splashed on you when you dance. So the traditional marriage is important, but don't confuse it. It could be your undoing if that's all you had. So always make sure that you have registry marriage. And I said the registry marriage can occur through your church if your church is licensed and if the church complies with all the requirements. Or if you are in doubt or not sure and you don't want complications, go straight to the marriage registry and marry the love of your life under the act. When you have marriage under the act, you will have maximum protection of law for a wife and for a husband. I must tell you this, because the marriage act or registered marriage protects husband and wife. Let me tell you how it works. It protects the weaker party in the marriage. Statutory marriage protects the weaker party. And the weaker party may not always be the woman. I will give you an example. In one of the cases we handled, a woman met a man from America. A married woman met a man from America, fell in love with him, and the man promised her to take her straight to America immediately. But she has to divorce her husband first. The woman called the husband and said, "Hey, it is over. I'm returning bride price. The marriage is over." The husband said, "Hell no. We married under the act. Therefore, we are going nowhere. Not in a rush. Let us go through the high court to dissolve the marriage." So you see, the statutory marriage protected the man from the sudden shock of being abandoned by his wife. In another case we have, in the marriage, guess what she did? She went to customary law and claimed that they had only customary marriage. And because they had customary marriage, she said she has nothing to give the man. But the man wanted to get a share of the property. Yes, sorry, we had a brief interruption. So, the man came to us. We looked at the marriage, they had a statutory marriage under the act. We sent a message to the woman and said, Madam, don't go anywhere. This man, you married him under the act. You got to protect him. He's going to get something from you. You're a rich woman. He's a poor man. You're not going to just go that way. And by the way, that the man has been the one looking after the children. All the time we're going for conferences, traveling, that the man should get custody of the children because of that marriage act. So anybody who, it's just that women are usually the weaker party. That is why it looks as if it's only women that are protected by the marriage act. No. Anybody, the weaker party is protected, whether the weaker party is the man or the woman. So please make sure you have that. Okay? Now, another thing I have to explain to you before I go away is this. The notion of court marriage. When people hear the word court marriage, they think that it means that you should go to court and get married in order to have a court marriage. It's not true. No marriage is celebrated in the courts. No marriage is celebrated in court. So, court marriage simply means a marriage that can be dissolved only by the High Court. A marriage that can be dissolved only by the High Court. So, it is called court marriage because we are thinking of how you can dissolve it, not how you celebrate it. The court does not participate in celebrating a marriage. It is when it comes to the end of the marriage that we know whether the court's participation is necessary or otherwise. I'll give you an example. If it is a customary law marriage, you don't need to go to court to dissolve it. No, you don't need to go to court. You can just return the bride price and that's the end of it. Or if you go to court in the customary marriage, in the traditional marriage, you don't go to the High Court, you go to the customary court. And the customary court will interpret the customs if they can figure out which custom to interpret. Because sometimes there could be confusion. The man is from one village, you are from the other village, and two of you are living in another village. And we say, which custom do we follow? So, but I have told people, even if you are married only traditionally, and you can dissolve the marriage by returning the bride price, please go to customary court anyway and get the marriage dissolved there. So when you hear, like a case we handled not too long ago, 2 weeks ago, a man was telling me, no, I had no court marriage. I said, sure, you have a court marriage. He said, no, I'm telling you, I had no court marriage. I didn't go to any court. We didn't go to any court. I was looking at him. He kept arguing. Then he said to me, I know for sure. We only went to the local government. I laughed at him. I then explained to him that that thing they did in local government is what we call court marriage. In another case, a lady told her husband, her fiancé, honey, we're going to do court marriage. The husband said, over my dead body, I will never do court marriage. Never. Never do court marriage. Over my dead body, instead let me die. The wife said, okay, in that case, let's forget the court marriage. Let's just go to the local government and fill paper. The man said, sure, I can do that one. He went to local government registry and got married. He didn't know it was the same thing. So court marriage could be a marriage celebrated at the local marriage registry by the registrar of marriages. It could also be a marriage celebrated by a licensed church that complied with all the requirements. So when you hear court marriage, don't get carried away. Nobody's going to go to court to get married. We're only thinking of what will happen if you decide to end the marriage. So I hope this explanation will answer your questions, because many of you, I kept answering questions today. I got tired of answering these questions. I thought, instead of answering these questions one by one, why not I just explain to them? Okay? So, please, by the way, let me tell you something. If the church celebrates your marriage under the act, the church is going to give you 2 certificates. One certificate is the church's own certificate, and the other certificate is from the marriage registry. So ask yourself, those of you who married in the churches, how many certificates did you get? If you got only one, then the church did not marry you under the act. They just had a marriage blessing for you. And what do? You should know you're exposed. You should know you're exposed. It's unfortunate. Listen, people will say, hey, I will treat my wife right. I don't need the law to treat her right. I will not abuse my wife. I don't need the law. I'm a Christian. I'm that. Don't buy that too. Don't buy that. Let me tell you something. You see, to steal, to be a thief and to steal something is a sin in the Bible. Bible prohibits it, right? But also, we have a law that puts people in prison for theft, right? Okay. Why do you think that people are not stealing things? Do you think they're not stealing things because they fear the Bible? Do you think they fear God, that God is going to punish them? That's why they don't steal? No. They don't steal because they're going to go to prison. They're afraid of the law more than they're afraid of God. The only people who fear their religion, the only people who fear their God are the pagan worshippers. The native people worshiping pagan because the idols like Okija shrine doesn't forgive. If you do something wrong, it will kill you according to them. But you know, we Christians, God forgives us all the time. So that's why we keep doing all those things they said are sin. If you want to know whether people's behavior is controlled by the Bible or controlled by law, look at fornication. Fornication is a sin in the Bible, isn't it? But everybody is committing it. Everybody, including you. So why? Because, you know, if it is in the Bible, if it's only a sin, God will forgive. But if the law puts you in prison for it, the state will not forgive. So, don't sit down and expect that your husband will treat you in accordance with the Bible. Protect yourself with the law. You got to protect yourself with the law. Now, something else I will explain to you before you go. Learn to use lawyers. Learn to use lawyers when you are dealing with a legal situation. From my explanation of marriage, the fact that you don't know, until now, you don't know these things I'm explaining to you, means that there are many things you don't know in law. So use lawyers, experts. Don't rely on your common sense. Don't rely on your assumptions. You know, because we all grew up thinking, oh, we know about marriages. We're expert on marriages. I saw my mother. I saw my father. The way they lived. I saw my uncle. I saw my neighbor and his wife. That's not it. What you saw may not be the right thing. You need to take out time to study what marriage means. Study what the law wants you to know about marriage. Study the rights of your spouse, so you know the expectations your spouse will have. You know certain things. I have seen some men that accuse their wives of stealing their property. Oh, by the way, something else. If you married under the act, your husband's property is actually yours. You can't steal it. You can't steal his money. Yeah, if you married under the act. But if you married under the customs, his property is not your property. And if your husband reports you to the police and say, my wife stole my money, you know what the police will do? They will check the type of marriage. If it is marriage under the act, they say, oh, girl, she no fit steal your money, go home. If it is traditional marriage, they will arrest you for stealing his money. So you gotta know, if you go and choose traditional marriage over marriage under the act, you are living dangerously. I'm just trying to tell you, there are so many other reasons why you should have a registry marriage. Whether you call it registry marriage, court marriage, statutory marriage, registered marriage, they are the same. The same. That is marriage under the Marriage Act of Nigeria. Try to understand these things. Please, don't govern your life by the Bible. I'm sorry, you don't misunderstand me. The Bible is important, read it, okay? But always know that Bible is between you and your God. When it comes to dealing with your husband, be careful. Okay? He can do all those things. He only needs to pray for forgiveness and God will forgive him. Your husband could chase you out, harass you, do all these atrocious things, violate every part of the Bible. He only needs to pray and Jesus will forgive him because he forgives sinners. So, you follow the law. One final thing before I go, for those of you listening, I know you assumed that marriage is just a union between you and your wife. Isn't that what you think? You think it's an arrangement between two people? Now, there is another party to that marriage, the invisible party, the unseen party. That party is the government. Government is in your marriage. I want you to know that, always know that. So, if you are living well with your wife, no problem, you will not see government. Problems with your wife and you start beating your wife, you see that the marriage was not just between the two parties. The government will appear. And government will appear in what form? In form of the police officer that will arrest you, in form of the court that will try you, in form of the prison that will hold you. So, always know that there's a third party to your marriage. It's up to you.
Hello, so you all have heard the lawyer now. Now don't hear him from his own mouth. So before you get married, please, you need to plan well. Nobody plans to go into a marriage and fail. But with the way things are now with side chicks and kayamata and baby mamas, so you need, when you're going into marriages, both the men and the women, this applies to everybody. You need to be wise because you have some women now, they will go have children for another man, or they will get pregnant for another man, bring it into the marriage. So this applies to both men and women. Plan wisely before you go into any marriage. Both of you should protect yourself for the sake of the children. Thank you, and please share. Thank you.